welcome to the second of two videos for GM3, Geometry and Measure 3, and we're going to look at the next bit of Pythagoras' theorem, and we're going to look at questions when we do know the length of the hypotenuse. Okay, so we've got Pythagoras calculations, and I'm going to call these type 2. We know the hypotenuse. So we've got a little bit of rearranging to do, like this. We're going to use Pythagoras' theorem like that. A squared plus b squared equals h squared. But we're going to know h squared and 1 of a squared or b squared. So we're either going to have to move b squared over like that, or we might have to move a squared over like that. Anyway, it's easier when we do an example, so let's have a look. Now we know this is Pythagoras because we've got a right angle triangle and we're dealing with sides. So remember, the first step is to identify the hypotenuse. There it is. The right angle points to it. So we can see, we know the hypotenuse this time, and on video 1 we didn't know the hypotenuse. So let's write down Pythagoras' theorem this way this time. A squared plus b squared equals h squared. Notice that h squared is on its own in the formula. So A, well, that's side BC, and we'll write BC squared. 9.7 squared is added to that, equals the hypotenuse squared. So the hypotenuse is 12.7. Now, we're trying to find out BC, so we're going to have to shift this little thing here, this 9.7 squared. So that goes from left to right. It changes sides, so it does the opposite, which is now minus 9.7 squared. Now we could work them out like that, or you could just go to the calculator and do 12.7 squared minus 9.7 squared equals, and you'd get 67.2. And now it's just the same as the previous video. We square root both sides, we get BC equals that, and 8.19 blah blah blah, so to one decimal place, 8.2. Now remember, the hypotenuse is the longest side, so whenever we do a Pythagoras question, we should always just check that the hypotenuse is the longest, and we can see it is. It's 12.7, and that is the longest one. Okay, let's have a look at another one, and then we'll get you going on some of them. So let's try this one. So we know it's Pythagoras. Let's identify the hypotenuse. Okay, so we're going to write a squared plus b squared equals h squared. So we're trying to find BC. So we've got BC squared plus 5 squared equals the hypotenuse squared, and the hypotenuse is 13. So we know what we've got to do. We've got to move that plus 5 squared over to the other side, and there it is. 13 squared minus 5 squared is 144. Take the square root, and BC equals 12. So the really important thing is when we write the formula at the start, a squared plus b squared equals h squared. The hypotenuse must be on its own. Then we put in all the numbers and letters, and we rearrange, and we end up with BC being found out. Excellent. Now in your booklet there's 2 little examples. Have a go at those 2, check them, and then go on to do the exam type questions. Okay, so press pause, do the first 2, and then when you want the answers, press play. Okay, how'd you get on? Let's have a look at the first one. There's the hypotenuse. So we know we're going to use a squared plus b squared equals h squared. So we've got bc squared plus 12 squared is 15 squared. Move the 12 squared left to right. 15 squared minus 12 squared is 81. BC is the square root of 81, which is 9. Excellent. Let's look at the second one. Once again, point to the hypotenuse. And when we write out the formula, the hypotenuse goes on its own. BC squared plus 7 squared equals 25 squared. You know what to do now. Move the 7 squared, and then work them out. 576. The square root of that is 24 centimeters. So there we go. Now if you've got those right, move on to the 2 exam type questions next. If you didn't get them right, go back over and make sure you know what you're doing before you do the exam questions. Okay, so press pause, and when you want the answers, press play. Okay, let's have a look at question number 3. Calculate the length of the side marked X. So there we go. Now in the exam we've just got to make sure we don't jump in. We've got to think, okay, Let's identify the hypotenuse. Okay, so I know the hypotenuse, so I'm going to write that. A squared plus b squared equals h squared. So x squared plus 8.4 squared is 9.2 squared. Let's shift that 8.4 squared. Let's work them out on your calculator. 9.2 squared minus 8.4 squared equals 14.08. X is the square root of that. 3.8 to 1 decimal place. And again, we just check hypotenuse is the longest. Yep, 9.2 is the longest. Let's have a look at question 4. So we've got a little kind of story thing to try and put us off. In the exam, you've just got to be able to think, hang on, that's just a right angle triangle. So that means I'm working at length, so that must be Pythagoras. So let's have a look. We've got a ladder resting against the top of a wall. The ladder's 4.9 meters long. They've marked that. And the wall is 4 meters high. Okay, let's put that in. 4 meters. How far is the bottom of the ladder from the base of the wall? They want us to work out that. There's our right angle triangle. Where's the hypotenuse? There it is. So we'll write a squared plus b squared equals h squared. So we've got x squared plus 4 squared equals 4.9 squared. And now we just move the 4 squared like that. Work that out on a calculator. 8.01 square rooted. And there we have it. 2.83019,434, 2.8 to 1 decimal place. And there we have it. That's Pythagoras done and dusted. You can now do anything, any exam question. You can get some really good marks for Pythagoras. So that's all for this week. And it's bye for now, and I'll speak to you next week. Have a good week.